Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Lean In Olympia. I'm Corey Passons. I'm here with Interfaith Works. This podcast is a monthly podcast that features conversations at the crossroads of humanity, justice, and belief. We're coming to you from Olympia, Washington. As I said, I'm here with Interfaith Works. My job in Interfaith Works is with Interfaith Relations. Interfaith Works is a coalition of around 30 affiliated faith communities and also affiliated organizations. We're also one of the region's largest social service providers for people experiencing homelessness in our region, and we just celebrated our 50th year. We're really excited about that. So check us out online at our website at interfaith-works.org for all the things going on in the organization. And you can find past episodes of this podcast on our website, as well as our YouTube channel, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So please subscribe and you'll never miss an episode, and you can stay up to date with what we're doing on the podcast. All right, so I'm very excited to welcome my colleague, friend, and guest today, Lara Crutsinger-Perry, Reverend Lara Crutsinger-Perry. Welcome.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
Nice to be here.
Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to do a little intro for you, and then you're mostly going to tell us about who you are. So
Okay.
You are the pastor of the United Churches of Olympia. And you are ordained in the United Church of Christ, and you serve as the pastor of the United Churches of Olympia. When did you start that, by the way?
I have been 11 years at the United Churches,
Wow.
pastoring for the last 5.
Yeah. Okay. We'll explore that.
Yeah.
Okay. You were born in Washington, D.C., with graduate degrees from both University of Texas at Arlington and Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. You describe yourself as a queer, justice-oriented, faithful practitioner of the way of Jesus and other faithful rebel rousers. Nice, like that one. Before moving to Olympia with your family, you worked in D.C. as a national queer youth advocate at a national queer youth advocacy organization. Your non-pastoral work experience is grounded in community organizing, national service, and higher education. You enjoy tacos, thrift shopping, and being in nature. Is that the right order, too, of those things?
Depends on the day.
It depends on the day. Okay, nice.
But
okay.
Olympia is a great place for all of those.
It is a good place for all those, actually. Yeah. So, thanks for the bio. Which I've known you for a while, but sometimes you don't. You know people, and you don't actually know parts of their story. So I'm excited to sit down with you today. And I guess I've known you since probably 2016, when I was newish in Olympia, and we were a part of the building of the Concerned Clergy of Olympia.
Right.
Which is a group of progressive clergy that was wanting to have a space of reflection and action around the election results at that time. And that group is currently getting reinvigorated. But I wanted to go farther back than that. I'm just kind of giving some reference point for when you and I got to know each other. But tell us about you. Tell us about your journey and where you're from. And you can start wherever you like, but just like to know some origin data so we can get to know you a bit more. And I always find that enriches the way we talk about the work that we do in the world, knowing where we're from and who we are in that way.
Yeah, thank you. I sometimes think, when I think about my life's journey and how I ended up here, it feels a little bit like the old Family Circle cartoon, where the little kid is running around and has quite the journey, and it's not so much this far, but it's all the things in between, right? And so I feel that a little bit in my life. You mentioned I was born in D.C. and lived there and lived on the East Coast till I was in the early teen years. My parents are both native Texans, and they moved the family to Texas to be close to the large extended family. And
from D.C. back down to Texas.
Back down to Texas. And then my wife and I left Texas after our first kiddo was born and moved to DC. So I got to go back as an adult with my own family, which was an exciting thing to do. And then we were in that area till we moved to Olympia. And now we've been in Olympia 14 years, and this is the longest I've ever lived anywhere. And it feels lovely. It feels like I've put down some roots and have a community that I really, really enjoy. So
3 very distinct cultures or corners of our country. Yeah.
Yeah, and I appreciated how our parents moved us. We actually also did from DC, went to New Jersey before we came to Texas. And so I appreciated that my parents moved the family to places that had such diverse culture, different seasons. Texas doesn't have a lot of seasons, so it was nice to live places that had snow and autumn and so I growing up, my family was really important, and my parents took us everywhere. I just have memories of these epic car camping trips down to Texas to see all the relatives and the cousins for family reunions. And so I feel fortunate that I have seen and experienced lots of different areas of the country, and now I am happy to be in the Pacific Northwest.
Happy to be here. You mentioned you got to see a lot of different family. Were there any particular family members that just kind of are still with you and that were really just special to you, or gave you something like a durable gift in your life?
Sure. My grandparents certainly come to mind. My paternal grandfather is someone who is one of those ancestors I feel very close to. He was a kind of a true iconic cowboy, and so I have memories of him. I was just talking to someone about this. I was like, about 95% of my memories of him involve cows and going out.
He's like a literal cowboy.
Yeah, like a literal cowboy. And his love of the earth and his gentleness with animals just really, I feel inside me to this day. And then my maternal grandparents were just these adorable, loving people who really created a large extended family that I have cherished over the years, of just such funny cousins and shenanigans that we would get up to on family reunions and fun that we would have. So I feel certainly blessed in that area.
It's such a gift to have ancestors or mentors that you can call upon. And for me, one of the things in my life I've found is that some of the mentors, I didn't know what I was getting when I was getting it from them.
Certainly.
And you mentioned your grandfather, maybe there's some of that as you look back and you're just kind of in the moment, and then you look back and you're like, wow, I can name these things that were there from him. It's really special.
Absolutely.
You mentioned gentleness and like appreciation of the earth. Those are really deep gifts.
Yeah.
And I'm sure those have shown up in some of your offerings to your congregation.
They have, and certainly when we moved here, we bought a little hobby farm, up on the northeast side, and kind of got to live out some of those dreams that I had always had of visits with him and adventures with the family, and we're able to recreate some of those for myself and for my kids, and I do very much feel like, my ancestors were a part of making that happen for me.
Did you have cows?
No.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to. We didn't have quite enough space. They take a lot of space. So we went with goats and chickens and the normal Olympia
What's
farm
the minimum
animals.
acreage for a cow? Not a question I expected to ask today, but
Well, we decided
need to
3
know.
was too little. So
for a cow, okay,
For a
that's
cow.
that's still a lot of land, but they roam. At this time, we're talking about your family. You're in Texas. You're moving back to Washington D.C. Were you discerning a path that you would say you might have expected where you're at today? Like, what was the path unfolding? How are you following that?
Sure. I don't think I ever imagined this in this way. For me, I went to I studied religion and psychology in undergrad, and I went to seminary, and so then one would think that would have led me here. But I grew up in a faith tradition that is not queer affirming and is no longer even female affirming. And so I realized that I was queer while I was in seminary, and I stayed in the closet way too long because I knew I would get kicked out if anybody found out. And so once I finished seminary, I quit my church job and walked away from church altogether. Just didn't want to have anything to do with it. And I also have a master's of science in social work, and so I got a job using that and just built a lovely career using my social work degree, and really was away from church for a long time. And finally, I was introduced to a congregation that was just very healing for me, very beautiful worship experiences, and so I spent a lot of time just needing to heal and sitting in the back of a church, hoping nobody would ask me my name, and I did that for a long time, for a really long time. And when we moved to Olympia, it was honestly once we moved here, that I decided, still kind of felt unfinished, wondered if there was a place for me in the kind of an organized religious community. And so I kind of took a risk, and I actually got hired on at Westminster Presbyterian Church, one of our sister congregations in town, and it really kind of started out as an experiment for me, and then became an affirmation that yes, there is a place for me within this community, and that I have a voice that maybe needs to be represented, and that I have a ministry that I can share. And so it was in many ways surprising to be back in ministry, and and I think the most surprising thing for me is how much I love it, and how how good it feels to have found the place, and to feel healing and fulfillment, and absolutely fortunate to be at the United Churches with that amazing congregation.
Yeah, they are an amazing congregation. I want to talk about them in a little while too, and I also just want to name just my gratitude for you surviving your seminary experience. And I went to Seattle University School of Theology and Ministry, which, as you know, closed its doors a few years ago. But when I was there, many of my colleagues were people who had migrated to the Northwest because they weren't able to do their theological work in their denomination because they were queer. And I've never felt that I've never had that judgment put on me before, as a just cis guy, but when I got to know my colleagues and see the deep pain of that, because it's not just a political label, there's a theological overlay that's a deep judgment that people are imposing that is just so painful, and I hope that we can heal from that.
Yeah, thank you. And I find that to be an important place for me in my own ministry of making sure that places for healing exist. And I can remember, and I think, in part how I ended up back where I am today is because along the way, there were these very strong women of faith that were a part of my life. So after leaving the church and kind of using my social work degree, I got hired by an organization that was run by a Methodist minister. And Diane was the first person I came out to other than my close-knit group of friends.
Okay, were you scared?
Absolutely, absolutely. And she was just kind and loving and supportive, and just everything you would want, right? Everything you want to hear, that you are loved and you are valued, and congratulations, right? Wow. on actualizing and feeling yourself. And then when I went to work for the university, my supervisor was a nun, Sister Mary. She ran the center at the university where I worked. And so again, I have this very strong, radical Catholic nun that was a mentor. Oh, absolutely. Oh, okay. Completely affirming. Yeah. Very much so. And so I just, all along the way, there were people of faith that kind of kept me tethered when I was trying to figure things out.
Yeah. Those are powerful figures. I mean, you talked about ancestors earlier. Those are mentors. They're powerful. I mean, you when you're talking about them, they're like, I can kind of feel there. I've met a couple of real like tour de force Catholic nuns who are no nonsense, and they're all about justice. They're in a system, they're in an institution, but they also live out values that they're sometimes expressive beyond their institution too. And you mentioned rebel rousers and people within institutions that are not affirming can express affirming values, and they in that way they're resisting, but just within their own setting, because not everyone leaves their denomination or their congregations, but they work sometimes within. It's a whole diversity of ways to work with it.
It is, and it's powerful when you find them. Yeah,
and so I love those examples. Any examples as you think about your ministry that you're trying to not emulate? If you want to pass on that one, that's fine too. But I couldn't avoid the two sides of the coin when I was thinking about it today.
I mean, I won't name names on this one, but and that's such an interesting question. I've walked into so many spaces where either because of my gender expression or my orientation or my gender that I'm not appreciated or recognized, right? And the white church in America has a lot of apologizing to do for how it treats people. And I certainly have borne witness to that, and just seeing how, even in my own life, people who growing up, I felt like they loved me and they cared for me, and they did, as long as you believe what they believe. And then when you don't, well, all of a sudden, you're not welcome anymore, right? And that seems very counter to who I believe the Holy One is, and counter to how I interpret and live out the teachings of Jesus. So I certainly have seen the harm that the church can do in many different places.
In many different places, yeah. I mean, one of the ways that I work on that is the toxic masculinity, and just faith leaders that emulate the sure male who always has the answer and is presenting in a certain way. And it wasn't until years later I realized that's not a healthy model, and it's not something that's serving me. And then discovering that and figuring out how you or I or anyone who seeks to be in that role, how do they function in a way that's healthy? Or are you being influenced by those, cultural overlays that actually sometimes are not very healthy at all? Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I am curious about, so there's this weird thing with this like fiction versus reality. But it's like training versus reality. Seminary happens, and then reality happens. And I'm just curious if you have an episode that you might want to share, or an experience of a surprise of, as you kind of came into ministry, of something that, despite the best efforts of our teachers to bring us into this very subtle field, of ministry, any surprises that you had along the way as you stepped into the actual work?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think seminary, at least my seminary experience, really only focused on, teaching and preaching, right? A very specialized field. But it feels like to me, ministry or pastoring, right now is almost a generalist field. You need to be able to teach and preach, but you also need to understand budgets and administration and community organizing and just lots of different components, pastoral care, all these different components that go in to serving in a parish ministry setting like I'm doing. And so I feel like I'm a little bit surprised most days by what happens, and we're right across the street from the Capitol, and that location is just sacred to us, and it brings into our space just this range of diversity of folk and experiences, and so it's a little bit amazing, and it's a little bit different every day, and it's certainly never boring, and probably 80% of it they don't teach you how to do in seminary.
I remember a couple of years after I got out, getting away all these books. I was like, these are actually not helping me. I'm getting, but you said you talked about your career very briefly as a social worker,
right?
And that, now that I understand that job more, social work, and also ministry, I'm thinking, wow, that must be a huge benefit to how you just live and breathe in your work now.
I certainly think it's made me a better pastor than I would have been if my path hadn't taken me to these other fields. I feel like the trainings I got, the experience that I got in the different places where I worked, in my specialty in social work was administration and community planning, and those come into play very nicely, right, in a church setting. So I'm very grateful for how all of my experiences, I feel like, kind of prepared me, and are applicable in the setting that I'm in now at United Churches, for sure.
Is there some aspect of the work that was what's a place of unexpected joy that you've had in the work? I know we've talked about some specific way or general ways you're enjoying the work, but is there something that was unanticipated that as you maybe started the work or as you were in it for a while, you realized, oh, I'm actually registering joy from this part of my work? Yeah,
that's a really good question. And, as I think about it, I even all the way back, to my days in graduate school in Fort Worth, Texas, I can think about families that, you spend enough time with people, right? And you see them grow, and they call you when things go wrong, and then they invite you over to celebrate things that have gone right, and it really is a communal experience. And I can think of families from all those years ago. I can think of families now where that exists, where it's just a kind of a sacred way to be in relationship with people, and I am surprised at the depth that some of those experiences can go, with the understanding of we're not what has brought us together and what binds us together is very different than maybe how we make up relationships in the other places in community. And for me, a lot of the joy also is that I can't think of a lot of places in town where you can get 6 or 7 generations together anymore, and that's something really joyful to witness for me. Is the whole lifespan of people gathered together, having fun, eating. Engaging in spiritual practice, right? Kind of supporting each other through the day-to-day of life.
Absolutely, it's one of the most unique places of intersection in our culture, I think, for sure. I'm curious. You mentioned earlier about the work of ministry today and how it looks very different than 50, 60 years ago. Some people talk about, ministry and the public square, the relationship with the public square. I'm curious how you understand your work and the impact of your work beyond your building, in what I'm starting to talk about as the public square. And let me just do one little caveat here too, is that the Pacific Northwest, this is called the Nun Zone, not like the nuns we were talking about earlier, but NONE. The Nun Zone, we're the highest percentage of unaffiliated people, meaning people who aren't connected formally to a faith community. Not that they're not religious or have their own spiritual practices, but they're not affiliated.
Right.
This region is the lowest region of affiliation in the country. So I'm just curious, as you think about that, as you think about the multi faceted work of ministry, how do you understand your work in the public square here in Olympia?
Here, yeah. Well, I think at first what comes to mind is the importance of groups like Interfaith Works, who we are glad to be affiliated with and a part of because of how you foster collaboration and understanding across faiths of the needs of our community and the ways that we can share common values and come together and work together. And I think that's really important to understand that that there are many spiritual paths, and then there are some to whom might be categorized as maybe not on a path, but we share common values with folk beyond any of those kind of labels we give to spirituality. And I think finding those is important. And I think partnering and collaborating is so important. And one of the ways we do that at United Churches is, of course, of using our space. And as an access point, as a point of organizing for different groups in town and groups that come to town during the legislative season. And that's an important part of how we try to honor the physical space that we've been given and the location that we have been given. But
can I just mention, for people who might not know, where this is literally kitty corner from the Capitol. So we're talking about 11th and Capitol.
Right.
And I mean, like literally south, what is it, southwest corner, that's where the Capitol campus starts. So you couldn't be more connected to, the energy and the presence and the, the Capitol and the work there. Yeah.
And so I think, that location as well really encourages us and emboldens us to speak to justice and to understand that acts of justice are acts of worship, and that that there are ways for us to engage in that, and there are ways to offer healing and ways to offer safety and affirm the sacredness of all people, and so coming to the building, right? Coming to worship is about getting the skills and the kind of the spiritual feeding that we need so that we can be in community and work in solidarity and work in collaboration with others across all ways.
And your congregation, you talk about your building, and you are a hub, especially during the legislative session, for groups that want to organize and then mobilize towards the Capitol. But I mean, let's just be real too. Not every group. You wouldn't have. Yeah. So how do you then determine what groups your congregation wants to support and amplify amongst choices of communities that might seek the space but wouldn't have an endorsement from your congregation to do that? How does that work?
Right. Yeah. So that's a good question. It's important for us that the groups that come into our space hold a common value with us, and we don't have to hold all of them the same, right? But that there is a common value. It can be a value around the stewardship of creation, around the bodily autonomy of women and our trans kids. It can be anti-racism work, right? It can be, lots of, as long as we can hold a connection of shared value, then people have come into our space. And we've had this wide range then of folk who've come through our space because they're advocating for fair housing or disability, awareness, or, things that we also feel like we are called as faithful people to also speak to. And those are the overlaps that we look for. And we've learned a lot from the groups that come into our space and share with us of what's happening across the street and across the state and in our communities around social justice issues. And that's important for us as well.
Yeah, yeah. Tell us about the congregation itself. I mean, you helped me remember today the United Churches of Olympia is a united church. Tell us about that history and why that name. And you are ordained in the United Church of Christ,
Correct.
But your congregation is more than that. So help us understand the makeup of your congregation and your.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the congregation itself is about 110 years old. And it is what in the religious world is called a federated congregation. So it is two congregations that exist in two separate denominations who have come together to be a united congregation. And the way the story goes, and some of this might be lore, but I like it, is that back then the UCC was called the Congregationalists, and the First Presbyterian Church of Olympia, that one had a building and one had a pastor, and the other needed the other. And so they started having talks about, well, maybe we could, pool our resources. Maybe we could come together. Maybe we could meet our needs by worshiping and becoming one church. And that the invitation went out around town for others to join in as well.
Okay.
And that these two groups were the only two that decided to federate. And then they created the United Churches of Olympia. And so we are affiliated with both denominations. But what's interesting is that in our DNA is this acknowledgement and opportunity to unite with others for the sake of building a just and progressive worshiping community here in Olympia, which is, I think, pretty cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. And the word progressive, of course, has a lot of different, flavors to it. Tell me about that word. When your congregation uses that word, what's the subtext to that word?
Yeah. United Churches has a long history of trying to embody their faith values. And sometimes that's been more challenging than others, and sometimes that's been more risky than others. But the United Churches is completely open and affirming of the LGBTQIA plus community, and has been for a long time. And this church is doing anti-racism work. This church has a green team, and we're looking at our environmental stewardship. We're trying to, see ourselves as a part of creation and the divine in creation, and that's important to us. And so, the United Churches has a long history of being affirming of women in leadership, of welcoming all, right? And so that those are core values that have been important to this congregation for generations, and will be for generations to come. Yeah. It's just it's a part of who they are as a people.
Yeah. How did you receive that culture? Who shared that with you? As you're considering that, I mean, it feels really important. It also feels really sympathetic to who you are. And your whole journey you've been sharing with us about. When did you start to know about this culture within this heritage, really? And
Yeah,
United Churches?
when my family moved to United Churches, and we moved here with several intentions, and one was to find a faith community that we could engage in, and just driving around town, the rainbow flag was hanging, and we're like, well, we should go visit that one, right? And of course, we're familiar with the United Church of Christ. I was not familiar really with the PCUSA at the time, and so we went, and you could just walk in, and you knew that. You knew, because I had some of my own little children squirming and running around, that there was a culture of just humanity and kindness, and you didn't have to just put on your Sunday best and sit there and be prim and proper, but you could just show up as a person who you are in that moment, and be cared for and ministered to, and so that kind of started us on a journey of this church feels different to us than some of the other churches that we'd been to, and that felt good. And then you kind of keep learning, and you hear the stories that get passed down from the generations, and it's yeah.
And remind me, was this the place where you were walking in the door and sensing if you could have a home in this religion, or was that Westminster?
That was yeah. So it's an interesting story. We were attending at United Churches, and back then United Churches and Westminster did a VBS together, a Vacation Bible School together. And we had young children at the time, and I can remember asking if it was safe to send my kids to a Presbyterian church for Vacation Bible School. And so that started me on a journey of reading people's blogs and talking to people, and then learning that Westminster is actually a very beautiful congregation in town. And so from that experience, they were hiring a youth minister. And I began to wonder, and my wife was like, "You need a job."
Let me wonder for you. Yeah.
And so I'd been starting to look, and again, I was looking in social work, and I was like, well, let's just see what happens. Let's just see what happens. And so I got hired at Westminster, and I started there, working with their youth group, and had a wonderful experience. And then over the years, as opportunities changed, I moved down to United Churches, and kept a really good relationship with Westminster as well, until I became full time at United Churches, and still really, really appreciate the people of Westminster who took a chance on me, honestly, and started me on this phase of my journey.
But United Churches was where you walked in the doors, walked back in the doors.
Yeah.
That's a really big moment. That's a really big moment. I can't imagine how that influences your sense of stewardship and gratitude for that congregation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I didn't know that part of the story. It's denominations, as we've been kind of talking about, religions, very complicated, and Christianity is one of the many, world's religious traditions, and it's a very complicated faith tradition. There's just myriad ways that it's expressed around the world, and it's crazy to think that we should only believe there's one way that it exists. But it takes sometimes a lot of effort to find places where you can explore and feel energized and creative in this diverse religious tradition. It sounds like you eventually found that place.
I did. And what's interesting is I didn't walk into United Churches as a staff person.
Yeah.
I walked in as a community member needing a church home. And I found welcome, and I found healing. And so then to come back and become part of staff, it's very important to me that when other people come into the door, that they feel welcome and they feel healing.
Yeah. What if they want to sit in the back and not have anyone talk to them? Like, I don't
That's
know.
okay
Maybe
too.
like, yeah, it's a fine line.
That's why we have the back row.
That's true. That's true. You can kind of tell when someone's like, I'm good, but
That's okay.
Yeah, that is okay. But I just really am honoring that connection that you had with because they gave you something, clearly. And now you're serving them, you're serving with them,
right.
As a way to think about it. And that story is a very powerful part of your journey.
Yes.
Yeah. There are, as I mentioned, denominations are complicated, religions are complicated. Where have you struggled with either your denomination or your tradition?
I struggle with hierarchy. I struggle with, the bigness of religion, of our denominations, inherently then creates kind of a bureaucratic way of functioning, right? And so I do struggle with that. And yet, I understand why certain things have to be the way they are. But honestly, I struggle with those. I struggle more with the way that Christianity in white America just continues to try to avoid what I like to call the holy trinity of original sin, which is white supremacy, patriarchy, and greed. I get that saddens me, that the church, which is kind of rooted in patriarchy and rooted in white supremacy and continues to benefit from these systems, so much so that it is hard for churches in America to want to honestly address those and make any changes. So, I'm a part of a system that has done some really awful things, and so I have personal struggles with that, and yet here I am, feeling called and have a calling and have placed myself inside this institution, and find great meaning in it. So it's complicated.
I really appreciate the specificity of your critique, of how white America and Christianity have been convoluted in some ways. The three that you mentioned specifically that have done incredible damage, domestically and internationally as well, historically too. And your congregation, myself, the people who are listening, we all benefit from leadership voices that have the humility to say that, and then to not just that, but then what's next. And the only reason why I would impose that little aspect of what's next, is because I know what the work you're doing around it, and that United is doing around that. And so you're not just speaking these words, but you're offering space for, for reflection and action on that. And you're offering, guidance and your own story in that way, because it is going to take more for this tradition to heal than just to have some words about it. It's going to take some action.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And some generational work too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Which your congregation is demonstrating you're poised to do. You're growing, you're thriving as a congregation. And so it's just great to hear about your story in work today. I want to just ask if there's anything else you'd like to share about your community or the work that's going on currently, or as we're approaching a ledge session, what's happening right now in United?
I think we are, of course, in the season of Advent, which is a season of preparation, and in the Christian faith, the Advent kind of focuses on hope, peace, joy, and love as these virtues, as these ways of living, and I feel like these are spiritual disciplines that we need so much right now, to focus on and to cultivate within ourselves and to build within our communities. And so that's what we're doing. We are getting ready for ledge session. We are getting ready for the new administration. We are reminding ourselves of our ancestors and the journeys of the saints that went before us, and that our call is really no less than it was 3 months ago, but it is all the more right in front of us, and we're preparing ourselves to be good neighbors. We're preparing ourselves to speak justice to power, to speak love and healing and community, and to keep doing what we've been doing for 110 years, and keep looking for new partnerships, new ways to be better neighbors, new ways to be accomplices with those that are more at risk than us, and just that's just what we're going to keep doing.
Yeah.
You know?
And I guess I forgot to mention, as an aside, Interfaith Works, we have our administrative offices in the lower level of the United Churches of Olympia. And we, as an organization, we're grateful for the values that you've expressed today. And we feel, a deep sense of collaboration with you and the many other affiliated, members. And I appreciated earlier how you were talking, so generously about the diversities of beliefs and traditions that there are, and how those diversities, they will intersect with a life, which is in and of itself a very diverse thing. And for some people, they'll resonate with this or that tradition. Meaning will come forth, But for you to name that there are so many different paths, and this is a path that you're living into with fullness, as are the people who are coming there. And Interfaith Works is a space where we try to have those values that really kind of supersede the specificities of our religious traditions, and they let us talk together to recognize the air that we're breathing together is the same, and from there we can do good work together. And so thanks for being a part of that ongoing good work.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So as we're wrapping up, you mentioned hope, peace, love, and joy. Yeah. We tend to wrap up these sessions with an inquiry about hope. And if I'd have thought more Advent-esque, I'd have had you answer 4 ways, but I'll just stick with our normal one of hope. And how do you define hope? And where are you seeing it or even experiencing hope in the world today?
I love this question, in part because hope was just one of our emphasis just a couple weeks ago. And I wrote this down because you brought it up to me ahead of time, and I appreciated it. I love the poem by Caitlin Sita, and it's entitled, "Hope is not a bird, Emily, it's a sewer rat." And the author is, of course, referencing Emily Dickinson, but I love this idea of hope that is something that is scrappy and mangy and survives where not much else can, and that it has seen some stuff, as the poem says, and it is going, and it is in bringing in its way. It brings joy and optimism and strength with it. And so I like that image of hope, that it is something that is tough and out there. I also really like St. Augustine's quote about hope has 2 daughters, anger and courage. So anger at the way things are, and courage to make sure they don't stay that way. And those are 2 kind of thoughts about hope that I appreciate, and I see them. I see them in my kids. I see them I hear them in songs of protest. I see them in my congregation and folks in this town that provide mutual aid to each other, right? Who come together to uphold the dignity of everybody that lives in this community, and how we're able to come together. I oftentimes think hope is somehow forged in oppression, and comes to light where it's most needed, and where it's most practiced. But those are two images that I like about the concept of hope.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, once again, I want to thank our guest, Pastor Lara Crutsinger-Perry, for joining us today on this episode of Lean in Olympia. Thank you for coming by and taking some time. And again, you can find past episodes of the podcast on our YouTube channel, Spotify, and Apple. And don't forget to follow and subscribe so you can never miss a new episode. And you can check out what we're doing as an organization on our website at interfaith-works.org, or find us on Facebook to stay up to date. Thank you for being here. Peace to all of you, and have a great rest of your day.